What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The celestial compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Beal. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Beal.
EmpowermentUnlimited.net with another exciting installment of Celestial Compass. Before we get to our topic and guest, which both have a lot to do with political astrology, so everyone hang tight, I want to update briefly the August forecast. The full forecast is at OMTimes.com and also at my site, EmpowermentUnlimited.net. The big events that I want to alert you to for the second half of the month are, well, first off, right now, our socializing mode has moved into Venus, meaning that people are going to at least play like they want to get along and do things to entice others to be nice to them. I know it's kind of a cynical way of putting it, but we're still very much in worker bee mode, and we're going to want to integrate other people into it with Venus in her home sign of Libra for the rest of the month. Very soon, we'll have kind of a fusing of our minds and actions, so it'll be a moment of thinking something and making it so, a Jean-Luc Picard streak for everybody when Mercury joins Mars in Virgo on the 18th. That's astonishing energy for planning, strategizing, running spreadsheets, and actually having follow-up for what you've got going. Things will be kind of chaotic over the weekend with Mercury and Mars both making aspects to Uranus, the guy that throws monkey wrenches into things. You think something's going to go a certain way, and then bam, Uranus gets involved, and anything can happen. This can be liberating. It can open you to other possibilities. It may bring epiphanies. It will break you out of a stuck feeling. And the chaos doesn't last horribly long because Venus very quickly has a stabilizing aspect with Saturn, the planet of adulting. On the 23rd, Venus trines Saturn, and whatever we do have abiding in our life, we really want to shore it up, commit to it, bring structure to it. And around that time also we have the second full moon in Aquarius. That's actually the day before, on the 22nd, when Mercury and Mars are both having their little fun with Uranus, which actually rules this full moon. Now you might think, didn't I just hear this? Last month we had a full moon in Aquarius as well, and this one will have Jupiter nearby. Jupiter, the guy that ups the ante of any action that he's near. And this means that the status reports we're getting about our role in our collectives, in our friendships, will be possibly cartoonishly large, possibly just really, really fun. But watch for plot twists involving who you thought were your friends. There have been many, many splits and separations going on all year, and this one could bring another round of realizations of, well, that one's run its course. The final thing I want to alert you to is that at the end of the month, on the 30th, Mercury moves into Libra, Venus's intellectual home, where he will spend quite a bit of time because his last retrograde, or his next retrograde, starts at the end of September in this sign. So it's great for thoughts, for communicating, for negotiating, and sharing info. And with that, I am going to be quiet and introduce, well, I'm going to be quiet with my forecast and introduce our guest, Robert Glasscock. For over 56 years and 56,000 clients, Robert Glasscock has consulted with people from over 122 countries. He authored over 25,000 words annually for many years in American Astrology Magazine's monthly and annual yearbooks. His writings for newspaper columns, magazine articles, and anthologies have been cited by Liz Greene, among others. He contributes astrology webinars for organizations internationally. For the past 9 years, he's also presented over 300 webinars, classes, workshops, and practicums for Kepler College, which is the country's astrology college. He hosts student-requested Solar Arcs practicums, now in their 4th consecutive year, for in-depth astrological work predicting events which have later been confirmed in the news during Trump's administration and now into President Biden's. And I have been in a number of these practicums and am really, really honored that you've joined us, Bob. Thanks so much for being here.
Wow, Kathy, I don't quite know how to follow that up. It's a wonderful introduction. I have to tell you, you know how much I appreciate you having participated in these groups and what you bring to it, because you've got such a great background and you've got an insatiable curiosity for the facts, which I love, and you just contribute so much to these practicums. You truly do. So thank you again for having me on.
Yeah, sure. This is great. We have a mutual admiration society going here.
Yes.
Just to start things off on an even playing field for some of the listeners, because not everybody has actually studied astrology, could you really briefly explain solar arcs?
Yes. For non-astrologers, even people new to this will often hear about their progressed moon, for example. Where's your progressed moon? And progressions in solar arcs are really two very ancient techniques that go back to the beginnings of astrology, really some 12,500 years ago, carbon dated, I'm talking about, when we did not have ephemerides that went 100 years into the future. So we didn't know, astrologers didn't know the positions of the planets even a year or two ahead. Maybe they were good enough astronomers, or their teachers were, that they had handwritten ephemerides that did predict the positions of the sun, the moon, and the planets for a year or two ahead. But that's as far as they could go. So they came up with a symbolic direction, we call it, or symbolic evolution of the horoscope that basically uses an old metaphysical equation. 1 day equals 1 year of life. So it's obviously symbolic. And it has zero basis in astronomy. But it does have a basis in something called harmonics. And so what solar arcs are simply is your progressed sun, which is the position of the sun as many days after you're born as you are years old. So if you're 50 years old, your progressed sun would be 50 days later after your birth date in the ephemeris, listing all the planets and their positions daily. So that becomes your progressed sun. If you take your progressed sun and subtract your birth sun's position from it, you will get an arc, a solar arc, because you're involving the sun, that's roughly 50 degrees. It depends a little bit on the time of year a person's born. It may be slightly less than 50, slightly more. That's why we have computers that do this. Nonetheless, you take that solar arc and add it, that 50 degrees, let's say, to every single planet and point in the birth horoscope. And that gives you your solar arc positions. And then you look to those to see if they form certain configurations with your birth planets. So in a nutshell, I hope that's fairly understandable.
It's a forecasting technique that
Yes.
scooches everything forward based on how far the sun has
Yes.
moved forward in your chart. Okay. And a solar arc, and there's a backwards version or a converse version. When an aspect is exact, it only happens at one point in your life. So they can be very when a solar arc planet makes an aspect to something in the birth chart, that particular aspect happens only once.
That's true. And so when you get into something like a nation's horoscope, like the horoscope for the United States, we live long enough. If we can survive 365 years, we will begin to have repeat solar arc aspect, but no human being does. So every solar arc in a human's, an individual's birth chart only happens once in a lifetime. And you absolutely can correlate those with hallmark events and turning points and situations in the life at those ages, which is what makes this so amazing to me, Kathy, because I am a skeptic by nature. I cannot believe that I have been an astrologer for 56 years. If anyone had told me this when I was 20, I would have said, you're crazy. I knew nothing about it. But the first book that I was told to get was the A to Z Delineator, and of course it's a huge, thick book written in the 30s. And it showed you how to set up your horoscope and then how to interpret it. And I got to a paragraph about my moon in Aries in my third house, which said you have a mole mark or a scar on the left side of your head or face from age 5. And I nearly came out of my chair because I do. It's a hairline scar. And I thought, wait a minute. This was my introduction to astrology. How the hell can this old book be so specific about something like that, And it intrigued me. So even though I'm a skeptic by nature, I'm experimentative. And if it works, I'll keep trying it. Well, of course, astrology does work. And to find later on, this many years later, that this group at Kepler wanted to study solar arcs in connection with the United States horoscope. This is going back now to the beginning of 2018 is when they wanted to do this. And, of course, the very first question the group asked, and I don't think you were in this initial group, but the first one, Kathy, that somebody said, is Donald Trump going to prison? And I thought,
I've heard this story, and I think you should tell it. Well, I mean, just give a little background about this practicum. All right, so this is a really notable teaching event because it is the longest running practicum that anyone knows of, because there have been 30 iterations of it, each 5 weeks long.
Yes,
and it's also astonishing, not just for its length, but for the accuracy of its predictions, because every week we talk a lot too, but we look at charts, we look at solar arcs up to the charts, and we look at transits to the charts, and we come up with themes and some very specific events and predictions. We're careening into a break. We have just a few minutes, so why don't you start with the prediction that launched the whole series that you just alluded to? Oh yeah, and I'll stop you if we have to take a break.
Great. The minute they brought it up, I thought, hot darn, I've got a great group of astrologers here. And I said, you show me, where do you look in the chart? Because if it's not in the birth chart, it's not going to happen. So you have to look at the natal chart. What house rules prisons in Donald Trump's chart? Bang, you tell me. So I led them through this step by step. And finally, hesitantly, they said, yes. And I said, yes, exactly right. If he doesn't die first, yes, he's going to prison.
And we're talking about yeah.
I should say, this was at the January of 2018. Nobody was talking about this man going to prison. Nobody. But we were. And now to see 3 years and 6 months later how it's all evolved, it's amazing. It's amazing to me. And this is only the first example. So as I like to say, these people don't keep coming back week after week and paying good money if we're wrong.
And I'd just like to clarify that we're talking about the 12th house here, and that's also the house of institutions. So there could be a confinement or a health institutionalization. Those are all as possible as present, and before people start sending me flaming messages over this. But there's Pluto in the 12th house.
And Mars.
And Mars. Pluto and Mars in the 12th. So, all right, so now people are going, oh, they're really going to talk about all this stuff. Yes, we are. After the break, we're going to talk about a few other very specific predictions that have been made, and some of which have played out, and specifically ones that touch on the turmoil that the United States has been undergoing lately and how far out we see that this might be continuing. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start. Let's go off into the break right now, and we'll be back in a minute or two. Thanks.
The cutting edge of conscious radio. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for Astro Insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again? empowermentunlimited.net.
Coping 19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Welcome back to Celestial Compass. This is Kathy Beal, and we are talking to Robert Glasscock about political astrology and the large focus on the long-running Solar Arcs Practicum that he's been hosting for Kepler College for the past couple of years. I'd like to just dive in, if you're comfortable. In right around the election of 2016, you made a prediction that ended up being incredibly controversial and also true.
Yes, I
Care
did.
to talk
Sure.
about that? Mm-hmm.
Actually, I gave a webinar, Kathy, for Kepler College on November the 4th of 2017, a 3-hour webinar on solar arc techniques. For maybe 60 people from around the world. And I only used 2 charts over the whole 3 hours. One was Donald Trump's, and the other was the United States chart. So it's fascinating that astrology can depict the psychology of a human being as well as the psychology of a nation. And it was a controversial webinar. Especially getting into Donald Trump's chart, I very deliberately made a point of using definitions for these configurations from Reinhold Evertine, another astrologer, a German astrologer, who, for example, would label certain configurations indicative of a crook and a swindler, quote unquote. Well, if I had called Donald Trump a crook and a swindler, then the class would have been able to say justifiably, well, that's Bob's opinion. But these are equations, really, as you know, Kathy. These written hieroglyphs that we use in astrology are very much like E equals MC squared. They are pre-physical archetypes that manifest in space and time, and we are trying our best to use a very crude two-dimensional representation of a four-dimensional fact. But nonetheless, the prediction that I made at the end of the 3 hours was that the spring of 2020, specifically the month of May, but give an orb, the spring of 2020 marked the beginning of the end of Donald Trump or the end of the republic for which we stand. And I just left it dead silence for a while, and somebody finally spoke up and whispered, "It all sounds so dire." And I said, it is dire. Nobody again had, least of all me, had any idea that this would lead to an attempt to overthrow the elections of 2020 and to storm the Capitol with the intent of killing Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence. No one could foresee that it was going that far. But if you go back to May of 2020, this is when George Floyd was murdered by the white cop, Derek Chauvin, and Black Lives Matter exploded. It was also the month that Donald Trump gave the first of a series of disastrous rallies. This one was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And indeed, it turned out, in retrospect, we can see this, that it was and still is steadily downhill for not only Donald Trump, but his children, whom we also discussed in this webinar. So that's the prediction that everybody rightfully should cling to, because no one else was talking about this stuff, not back then. And to be able to see it. Go ahead.
And that's what we do in these practicums. We look at specific charts with specific questions and then see, like, well, this looks like this is going to happen during this time period. And we were all, well, what other predictions that just jump out at you that are hot for right now, for example?
Well, I don't know about for right now. I'm thinking of one. I can think about that and say that we did back during the elections in Georgia. There were 4 candidates, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats in Georgia yet. And we looked at all 4 horoscopes and predicted that the 2 Democrats would win, which they did. And Warnock, who was a black candidate, has become quite an interesting figurehead during all of this. Now, back to your original question, what are you asking here now? let's talk some more.
Well, I was just thinking about what is going on now astrologically that's being borne out, because we were all seeing around the time that Trump had his Mars return, which was opposite the U.S. moon in the late degrees, like around 26 Mars. The House Select Committee on January 6th started, and that was a lot of news as Mars moved into Virgo, where it currently is, a lot of news broke like an information dam exploding around that time. The FBI with saying 4,500 tips were phoned in about Kavanaugh that they gave to the White House counsel. The acting attorney general testifying in front of the House Select Committee for 7 hours behind closed doors and implicating all kinds of people. More and more information coming out about pressure to overturn the election. Those are just things that
Those are just starters, which we've talked about, this whole information dam that was about to break. Now you can add things like Alan Weisselberg, who was Trump Org's CFO for all these years, and the children, specifically Donald Jr. and Ivanka, who are now also under investigation, and the fact Trump has exhausted all legal attempts to keep those tax returns from being seen or made public. He's lost every single time. So you add all that in, plus the bank's getting ready to call in their loans. Donald Trump is apparently, according to what I read in Forbes, about $1.5 billion in debt, which is due to be repaid in the next year to two. He ain't got it.
And an astrological signature for this, all right, is that transiting Pluto in Capricorn is basically parked opposite Trump's Venus in Cancer, which Venus is a money planet, which is conjunct Saturn. So a lot of things coming out, just so people listening don't think, oh my God, they're just talking politics. No, all of this has an astrological underpinning. And in fact,
this is why I am so glad that you are in these groups, my friend.
Because I in my Astro Insight group on Facebook will post news articles with the heading of what current aspect is reflected in the archetypes. Like there was a Venus-Pluto trine when Britney Spears' father stepped down as being her conservator last week. It's not just to discuss the event, but the astrological implications or connections in the event. And that is what happens in this, only in our discussion group online, there's like a flood of articles being posted constantly that bear out the information that we've pulled out of people's charts. So any other particular predictions?
We can do some predictions too, but it keeps occurring to me. This has been true for me. I think it's been true for you. It's been true for virtually everybody who has participated in these practicums for the last 3 years and 6 months. And they've all said, and I feel the same way, these practicums and astrology have made this whole experience with Donald Trump and COVID, which are related, and climate change, all of these big, vast transitions that the world is going through, understandable and not so much manageable, but understandable in terms of what's going on, how long it goes on, what can we do about it, are we doing it? For example, we looked ahead first day, beginning of 2018, at a solar arc of Saturn. This is once in a lifetime. It's moving to conjoin Mars in the nation's birth chart. Among other things, it's in the 7th house of open enemies, war. And that is a classic indication of civil war, a second civil war. When we started out, we were about 6 years away from that. We're about 3 years away from it. So all of this time, because we read that in the beginning, we look at the ensuing news events to see, are we moving closer to that kind of polarization, or are we pulling back from it? So that Biden's election was a pulling back from civil war, except on January 6th, you've got this insurrection that's moving closer to us. And from then on, because this was all planned too, The big lie that the election was stolen, despite the fact that 60 courts have said there's no evidence for any such thing. But for a certain amount of the electorate in America, the elections themselves are now suspect and always questionable. And so we've got all these voter suppression attempts that are pushing us further and further, frankly, toward a civil war. What that looks like may or may not be what the original one looked like, because as you and I have talked, and this group has talked too, all you have to do is cut off the GPS, and suddenly nobody can do banking, nobody can do hospitals. They don't run without GPS. So you don't have to have boots on the ground necessarily to inflict unbelievable damage. We've also talked about climate change and global warming and mass migrations due to famine and drought. And we've talked about COVID and how long that lasts. So all this idea that COVID's almost over, oh, no. We know as astrologers, transiting Neptune, which rules viruses, is in Pisces, which rules infections. So this pandemic will go at least until transiting Neptune enters the sign of Aries, which is not until January of 2026. So that's 4 years more. 4 years more that you can count on this virus affecting everything. You notice how it's affected the economy, shipping, delays in shipping, delays in raw materials, and so on and so forth, because of travel restriction because of the virus. So this is having an enormous effect on the whole planet. But we've got 4 more years of, if we didn't know astrology, we'd go, my God, the world is spinning out of control. It seems to be, but it's also temporary. It's not going to always be spinning out of control. But when you're in a transition like we are, which involves the world's religions, the 3 great is Abrahamic religion, all transitioning. Believers are getting fewer and fewer every year. So this is a huge change in demographics. America is no longer, it's just barely a white majority now. In 10 years, it won't be. And yet it's got, as we've discussed over and over, all of this racism built into this nation's government, which has to be addressed. So there are no easy answers and easy predictions as far as as far as much of anything.
Well, can we go back to Neptune? Let's go back to Neptune for just a second. All right, so many things that you have said, Neptune has been linking into. You mentioned the solar arc Mars heading for the U.S. No, solar arc Saturn heading for the U.S. Mars in Gemini in the 7th house of open enemies coming up in a couple of years. Gemini is a sign of duality. We've had a lot of things recently creating parallel realities, the sensation that there are 2 different universes happening. There are people who joke about, I'm here on Earth 1, and there's an astrological reason for this. We've had eclipses in the duality riddled signs of Gemini and Sagittarius, and they last year were squaring Neptune in Pisces, which is like pumping up the cosmic fog machine like crazy. So as those the force of those connections started abating earlier this year and started really moving away by June of this year. So there is a lessening of the disinformation flying around that was really, really strong last year. But what locks this into everything you've been saying is that Neptune in the sky right now, 2 things about that. It's opposite Neptune in the U.S. chart, which is in Virgo in, I believe, the 9th house of our philosophy. Am I correct? Or
it's in our 10th. It's in our 10th. It's in our 10th of the president. 10th
of the president. Okay. So transiting Neptune is opposing Neptune in the chart, and then last year the eclipses just whooshed that into craziness, and we had a president in office that was really pumping that up. But also, we've lived through Neptune opposing our Neptune before, which was right before the Civil War. So there are astrological recurrences already that presage or that are like this notion of civil war. But as you say, with this Gemini emphasis, I've been saying for some time, it's already going on. It's an information war. It's an information war.
Another thing that Neptune and Pisces both symbolize, as you know in astrology, that some astrologers tend to forget, is fossil fuels, oil, petroleum. And we're moving away by necessity for the good of the planet, because we really, scientists are telling us, we've got about 10 years, if that, to save ourselves and the planet. Things are so dire. 124 degrees yesterday in Sicily, the highest temperature in Europe on record. 124 degrees in Sicily. It's Death Valley temperatures. So these forces are going on whether we have abortion rights and gay marriage or not. So it's strange to me to see the prioritization of anti-abortion laws or anti-Semitic, all of the Proud Boy right-wing kind of stuff, scapegoating people when these huge forces are at work no matter what we do. So, but the thing I do like, Kathy, is transiting Jupiter, which is right now at the tail end of Aquarius, on top of our moon. It enters Pisces at the end of it, really in the beginning of 2022. And it'll stay in Pisces for a year there. So I'm expecting, it's going to be mixed, but I'm expecting some good news to come through scientific breakthroughs, also through some legislation. I've been surprised already by Amy Coney Barrett, or I've got so many names in my head now, the Supreme Court justices ruling. She just refused to hear a case, which throws it back. And everybody, the right wing is all up in arms. They were expecting her to rule in their favor, and she didn't. So I think 2022 will be a better year, but there's still some really nasty ongoing indications that we're not addressing yet. And I'm looking now at the midterm, because we have in 17, 18 states now, we have set a precedent. Arizona started this. Locally now, all of these red states have passed laws enabling the local Republicans to invalidate any election they like if they don't care for the outcome, and to start a phony audit like they did in Arizona, which keeps the election results up in the air, you see, and indeterminate and confused and confusing. And all of this keeps building toward this polarization and this uncertainty about what's real and what isn't, and can we trust the elections or not? And meanwhile, we got all these people armed with AK-47s, and they're fanatic. Mentally, they're fanatic. There's a beautiful article, a long article by, I believe, a Yale psychiatrist.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I just noticed I was so caught up with what you were saying. We're late for a break. I'll be right back.
Good.
Bringing a more conscious lifestyle to your world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
How would you like navigational tools you can use on your own? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, and click the Shop tab. There you'll find lots of talks and guides explaining the big influences at work now, like Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus and Taurus. You'll also find a variety of guided visualizations for relaxing, clearing your energy, or getting to know planetary archetypes. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back to Celestial Compass. This is Kathy Beal, and we're talking to Robert Glasscock about current events and the fate of the U.S. And I interrupted you so fervently that I don't remember what you were starting to talk about an article.
Well, the only thing I do want to say before we have to ring off is with Jupiter going into Pisces, which it does in January. I'm looking at the midterms next year. And we haven't really talked about these. And as you know, Kathy, because you're a part of all this group now, we haven't talked about this. My feeling, and you may or may not agree, with Jupiter in Pisces and going over Neptune, and Jupiter oppose our Neptune in the 10th and so on, I'm feeling like the midterms are going to see some former red or purple states flip blue. But those elections are very likely to be contested locally by a string of these audits. So the will of the people, I think, is definitely moving further away from the Republican Party, the GOP, because we keep hearing these articles about if we're not careful, we're going to become a dictatorship where a minority is ruling the majority. Namely, by minority, I'm talking about white Christian nationalists, which is, for all intents and purposes, the base of the Republican Party. The majority of the people are moving away from that, I think, and toward a more liberal, inclusive, democratic. This really is coming down to, are we going to have a democracy or are we going to have an autocracy?
And that's one of the themes of the Pluto return happening with Pluto and Capricorn.
Yes, it is.
One I want to throw out before people are, slitting their wrists out there or anything. Let's look at what's going on with Saturn and Uranus, which have been traveling in a square this year. Saturn, old ways. Uranus, let's do things differently, to put it in a real succinct way. Two things. The transiting Saturn is going to trine Saturn, the U.S. Saturn in Libra, in the 11th house, which has to do with Congress. What does that say to you?
Well, I think that, Mitch McConnell is already, for the infrastructure, flipped around, decided to seem like he's cooperating. So there maybe even some of the Republican leadership are realizing, as long as they are tethered to Donald Trump and everything he represents, namely the Proud Boys and anarchy, truly, as long as they stay tethered to him, they are going to lose badly. And if they can at least begin to give the appearance of cooperating on some things, which is what that trine is about, I think they are, the other thing I did say in that webinar of November 4, 2017 was I flat said, I don't see how the Republican Party survives this. I guess I still don't.
It's been having its Neptune return, so yeah.
Well, they're so associated with this white Christian nationalism now, and it really is a minority. Nobody's saying that you can't be a Christian or anything else, but this is very akin to the Ku Klux Klan, really, white Christian nationalism. And as usual, it is a minority, but it's one that's willing to exercise violence. The other thing, of course, here, Kathy, is the potential for a war here, a civil war here, or a civil war anywhere now with everybody armed with nuclear weapons, that any of these things can trigger a world war because the economies around the world are so totally interconnected.
So let's look at Uranus and Taurus just briefly before we have to shut this down. Isn't there a silver lining in that? Mars is going to be on it next August. Mars joins Saturn in the spring, and then it goes across Uranus and Taurus. And Uranus was last in Taurus during, what was that? The New Deal in the 30s.
That would be good. And unions, which have to do with Uranus in our nation's sixth house of the workforce, unions are, I believe, primed to make a comeback. We're down to almost between 6 and 8% of the workers are union now. It used to be about 30% at the height of unions. About 30% of the workforce was unionized, and then they had some bargaining power. Now there is no middle class. They have nothing. We've got the 1% and the other 99, and it's this economic inequality that cannot go on. And frankly, I think we're very close to something like the French Revolution, where you've got the nobility, 1% own 99% of the money. And everybody else, by the time famine and drought start kicking in, people start migrating for food and water. And the West runs out of water from Lake Mead and Colorado River, and L.A. can't get water, and Las Vegas can't get water, and so on and so on. Central California can't get water for irrigation. Suddenly people don't have food. People don't have water. They're moving. They're migrating. They have to survive. And this is going on around the world. It's not just here. So these are big, big forces that are demanding, you see, that the human race wake up. We are one race, not many. We're one race, and we have one planet. And no matter what our politics, we had better work together to fight these huge self-inflicted wounds. Fossil fuels, for example, we've got to abandon them.
And Uranus and Taurus holds the potential for innovative ways of dealing with resources.
Especially the Earth, Taurus. So you're talking about mining and mineral rights. We've already decimated the Amazon because of overdevelopment. So we've got a lot to repair. And population control is another one. Nobody is doing it. China, and they're doing a horrible job of it, apparently, the way I don't know how you do it. But some way or another, we have to limit population. You can't just have 7 billion people reproducing themselves every 5 years. Can't be done.
So how can we bring this back to the astrological component of all of this?
The thing that I find is that having been an astrologer for 56 years, it becomes a way of life, really, and a philosophy of life. Someone said to me the other night, I swear to you, 2 weeks ago at a party, then it's like a religion. And I said, no, it's not like a religion. Religion depends on faith. This doesn't. Astrology doesn't require any faith. It either works or it doesn't. So it's absolutely a science in that regard. And when I look at something like our practicums, which are now in our, third year, 6 months, going into our fourth, we're in our fourth year, we've been unbelievably accurate. So yes, it works. And when you know that it works, metaphysically, you can live in a world that is going through turmoil without you yourself being caught up in it, because you understand it. You're not panicked. You're taking care of your own business to the best that you can without becoming paranoid about anything. So it becomes a way of living that's very realistic to me, and also the opposite of fatalism. At least as far as an individual is concerned, you can look and see what your
elaborate on that.
Well,
Please
you can look at your birth
that.
chart. You can look at your birth chart and see what your weaknesses are and where you're likely to experience your downfalls and why and how. And you can say, gee, that's right. I do come from a long line of alcoholics. Gee, I do have a drinking issue of my own. Gee, I guess, can I handle that? Can I work with that? Can I overcome? And so on. So it's that, as opposed to some astrologers saying, oh, well, you're an alcoholic, and letting it go. That's not the point of astrology. The point of it is to say, if you're unaware, if you're unconscious, it seems to me from this horoscope, come from a long line of alcoholics. Do you have a drinking problem yourself? Yes, why, yes, I do. You better work on that. And so if they do, their sobriety suddenly becomes a treasure, not a weakness. So it's almost anti-fate astrology. And then, of course, the good things that you see in your horoscope, you can capitalize on. Somebody told me, I'll end with this. 2 weeks before I left Los Angeles, moved away after 30 years, I was at a party, and an actress friend of mine who'd known me forever said, you get everything you want, don't you? And I said, what? Because I don't. And she said, well, you came out here to be an actor, and you were one. Actors Equity, Screen Actors Guild, and then you wanted to be an astrologer, and you are one. And then you wanted to be a television writer, and you are one. And I looked at her and said, nobody's ever said anything like that to me. I can see where it looks like that, but no, I haven't gotten everything I wanted, but thank you for saying that. I feel like $1 million. And I thought later, it does look like that to other people. If that's true, it's only solely because of astrology. Because I use it, as I'm sure you do too, to really get input on any major decision of any importance that I'm going to make, just to get its input. Mm-hmm. I had a Japanese business client once, many, many years ago, decades ago. He said, he's a very successful guy. He said, I've never let astrology talk me out of doing something I wanted to do in business. I have let it delay my doing it until it's more propitious. And I said, you're a very smart businessman. And he was.
And it can help you see other ways of going about things.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Alternatives and options and ways out if you're in trouble. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, can we leave a nugget of optimism on the table for people? I have one to propose, and I'm curious if you have another. You have mentioned Jupiter moving into Pisces, yes, and that perhaps ultimately easing some things. Well, I'm going back to Uranus and Taurus. When Jupiter's in Pisces, it is going to make a sextile or an opportunity aspect to Uranus and Taurus. Could that not be a glimmer of, we have other ways of getting around things? And with Jupiter being in Pisces, which is, we're all in this together. That's my thinking.
I think so. And I think it also has to do with, say, the Aquarian age and Jupiter itself. The youth, I'm talking people under 30, basically, have a whole different approach, even to things like their national religions. Even young Islamists in the Middle East have a different perspective on Islam than an older generation. Look at what's going on in Afghanistan. Now, these people are desperate to get out from under the Taliban. Desperate. They're clinging to the exteriors of planes and falling off as the plane takes off to get away from. So the old-time religions are fading away, and the young people are far more aware that they're all connected, no matter what they look like or what their races are. They're all intermarrying, they're traveling, they're relocating. It's a great new world. And it's getting more and more colorful, as opposed to white supremacy. It's not just beige, it's all colors. And so I think the generations coming up are very hopeful to us. It's just a matter, I do think the transit of Jupiter in Pisces sextile Uranus gives us a full year of making a lot of progress, actually. There's some other things I'm concerned about, but I'm not going to bring them up. But yeah, I think on a very major level, I think next year we will make progress. And I do think the midterms is going to be interesting, because I do think that we'll be surprised at how many former strongholds of Republicans suddenly seem to be voting pro-democracy for a change. And when they do, their local election boards are going to contest those elections because they don't like the outcome. They don't want the Democrats to win. So we're still, but I think overall, next year is going to be better, let's say, than this year. I hope so.
Well, thank you. Where can people find you?
Go to Google Robert Glasscock Astrology, or just Robert Glasscock. I don't know if I come up.
It doesn't pick you up. Your website is rglasscock, numeral 4, cite.com, and it'll be in the show description. And thank you so much. And I had a blast, and I hope you will consider possibly continuing this conversation another time.
I would love to. You've got my number.
All righty. All right. And
thank you,
you guys, you are so welcome. And everyone, be safe. Look at my forecasts at OMTimes.com and empowermentunlimited.net, and we'll be back in 2 weeks.